Shalom to all my good friends and students and dear folks for whom I'm recording this. This is a message for Shavuot. I'm recording it a few days before Shavuot in this strangest of all calendar years that any of us has lived through. And I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem, where I have been for the past 5 months. Shall we say I came for the winter and stayed for the corona. And I'm very glad to be here, but I am coming home to the USA at the end of June. And hope to remain in touch with everybody. So speaking about Shavuot from Israel, of course, is interesting because Shavuot has such an interesting history here. An old history and a new history. Of course, we encounter the Shalosh Regalim, the three festivals, as you know, in the Torah, in the course of their passage from being agricultural festivals to national festivals. Pesach, we meet in the Torah, has already completed that transformation. Pesach is about Yetziat Mitzrayim, about the exodus from Egypt. The fact that there was an old spring festival of the slaughtering of lambs has somehow already been cooked into the historical event. Sukkot is mostly an agricultural festival. It's Tkufat HaShanah, the turning of the year, the final harvest. But there's one key line in Parshat Book of Vayikra where it says, Ki b'Sukkot hoshavti et b'nei Yisrael. You celebrate this holiday because I caused the children of Israel to live in Sukkot when I took them out of the land of Egypt. So you can see that Sukkot is in transition from being for agricultural holiday to a historical celebration. Shavuot has not made that transition at all in the Torah. In the Torah, it is purely an agricultural festival, barley harvest and first fruits. And that's what it's all about. You count 7 weeks after the first, after the first Shabbat following certain agricultural events. And the rabbis, of course, transformed it completely. It was 3 months after the exodus from Egypt, and the Torah was given 3 months after. It's in the third month after, I should say. And therefore, they made Shavuot into the festival of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. And that's how we celebrate it maybe since the 2nd, 3rd century, maybe earlier, we're not sure. But that transition happens completely in the world of the rabbis and not in the Tanakh. And in a certain sense, for the rabbis, of course, it's the festival. Since rabbinic religion is a religion of Torah, and since the rabbi is a rabbi because he is a Talmid Chacham in Torah, because he knows Torah and teaches Torah, it is the festival of the rabbinic calendar. Now, when Jews started coming back to Eretz Yisrael, the first kibbutzim, the early settlers, they were very much in rebellion against rabbinic religion. But they wanted the festivals to be Jewish, they wanted the calendar to be Jewish. So they recreated Shavuot as Chag HaBikurim. And for the first, I would say, 40 or 50 years of new settlement in Eretz Yisrael, Shavuot in the secular world and the religious world were completely different events. Shavuot for the kibbutz world, and then followed in, let's say, secular public schools in the cities, was the holiday of the first fruits. In kibbutzim, they had these big processions with the first fruits, but even in the schools, they would bring in fruit, and they would bring in the first fruits of their labors, the first new poems written, the first new music composed, the first new this and the first new that, and they made the festival based on, as much as they could, the biblical festival of Shavuot. Well, there's no greater teller of what's happened to Judaism in Israel in the last 20 or 30 years than to see the transformation of Shavuot. As the kibbutz movement has receded from being the sort of cultural avant-garde of the country, and as there's been a tremendous discovery, I would say in the years since the Six-Day War, there's been a tremendous discovery of what's called Aron HaSfarim HaYehudi, the Jewish bookcase, which includes everything from the Talmud and the Zohar to Aleph, Dalet, Gordon, and Echad Ha'am. The celebration of Shavuot throughout the country has turned, instead of Chag HaBikurim, it's become the time of Tikkun Leil Shavuot. And you see announcements everywhere in all kinds of very secular circles that we're having a Tikkun Leil Shavuot. It will go all night. People will speak on the following subjects in the following hours. Of course, the secular Tikkun differs from the religious one in terms of the topics. Sometimes they're political, sometimes they're musical, artistic, very often they're cultural. There's usually some bit of biblical history or biblical criticism or some Divrei Torah mixed in. but the sense that Shavuot is a time for, let's call it, encountering the intellectual heritage of Judaism is very widespread in Israel. And that's a part of a big process I've been observing in my many visits here over the last 20 years, following visits 30 years earlier. But in the last couple of decades, I've seen so much of the quickening of the pace of the birth of what I call a new Israeli Judaism. And it's wonderful to see. It's a Judaism that has everything to do with the fact that so many young Israelis after the army have traveled to India or Nepal or South America. And there they have had spiritual experiences and discovered spiritual traditions that they don't have automatic negative antibodies against. They come back to Israel and are looking for some way of finding that in Judaism. Some of them wind up, of course, becoming neo-Brahmins, other kinds of Baalei Tshuva, but a good number of them are seekers somehow looking to find something in Judaism. They combine with a large group of people who grew up in either the Dati Leumi world, the national religious world, or even the Haredi and Hasidic world, and have left, are on their way out, and are looking for some kind of alternative, or are half out, or are still observant, but intellectually freed from the blinders they once had, and are looking for something else. A new Israeli Judaism is emerging from the meeting of these two groups. And it's a beautiful and wonderful thing to see. It will have everything to do with love of the land and with love of the language, and with learning a certain amount of Hasidic Torah, and with learning piyutim from the North African tradition and the Near Eastern tradition, and a kind of seeking, a kind of broad seeking, and understanding that there is something of value in this tradition that we had set aside and want to come back to, even though lots of the people involved in it insist on saying at the end of that rap, Avalani Chiloni, but I am secular. That label, Chiloni, secular, is very important to a lot of Israelis. Some of it's tribal. I'm not one of them. I'm not like them. I'm not like the Orthodox. I'm different. Some of it's that tribal identity. But a lot of it has to do, I would say, with why am I secular? Because at some point in early adolescence, probably, I gave up on the childish idea I had of what God was, and nobody else ever gave me anything serious to replace it. So once I stopped believing in the old man in the sky who was going to make all the boo-boos better and make sure the world was fair and reward the good children and punish the bad children, once I gave up on the Santa Claus God, there was really nothing else for me. That's true of so many Jews who see that in America as well as in Israel, of course. You know them, you may be them, people listening. Or all of us are partly them. I'm partly them too, of course. Who gave up on belief in God and gave up on the story of Sinai because Sinai was, wait a minute, they came out of heaven, the tablets, and what does that mean, the word out of heaven? What does that whole picture mean? And what does it mean that God chose only us to give it to? Does that make any sense? And that's the eternal revelation for all time. All of it somehow is very hard if you take it in the literal way in which the Torah text presents it, and if you take it in the way that we were told it's supposed to be taken when we were 10 years old and never saw an alternative to. Well, I had the great privilege, one of the great privileges of my life was being a student of the late Abraham Joshua Heschel. Heschel was not usually a very excited teacher. Pedagogy was not his great skill. But I remember him jumping up and down in class and saying, Torah min hashamayim is not a geographical statement. The Torah from heaven is not a geographical statement. What do they mean by that? Torah from heaven doesn't mean it came out of the sky. Yes, that's what it looks like in the Torah story, and if you take the text literally. But Jews have been taking that text non-literally for something like 3,000 years. Already within the Torah itself, we see in Dvarim reinterpretations of the text that happened in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus. In later biblical books, we see reinterpretation already happening on a large scale, and of course, the whole rabbinic process is about reinterpreting. So Torah min hashamayim is not a geographical statement. The phrase min hashamayim, from heaven, can often mean from the hand of God, or in a divine way. When they say min hashamayim yirachamu, may May heaven help you. May heaven help you. Doesn't mean that help is going to come out of the sky. It means may God help you, or may you find help from some unknown mysterious source. That's what heaven help means. He says that's what Torah min hashamayim means as well. It means a Torah that has a divine nature. So what I have been trying to cook for the last 55 years or so, 60 years since I was a Heschel student, what I've been trying to cook is what I call a Judaism for adults. A Judaism for people, yes, who do not believe in that old fellow in the sky. My other friend and mentor, Reb Zalman, used to say, that God you don't believe in, I don't believe in that God either. We're people who understand that the world is not so simple. We're people who understand that if there's any fairness and justice in this world, it's up to us to create it. We understand the responsibility for the survival of this planet and its fragile nature, especially these years, is up to us and our human activities, and not to a Deus ex machina who is going to save us from it all. We accept that responsibility. That's what it means to be an adult. To accept responsibility also for your own spiritual life, for your own spiritual journey. And yet at the same time, we understand there is something deep and valuable in this tradition. We're not quite ready to dismiss it because we're not literal believers. We have a sense that we as Jews have a great privilege. We are heirs to one of the great spiritual languages and spiritual traditions of humanity. Without talking about Revelation for a moment, there are 7 or 8 great spiritual traditions in the world. Some of them have 200 million followers. We have about 12 million, 18 million, 12 million, somewhere in that number. Most of them are disinterested in it. A minority of them hold on to it so tight that you can't do anything creative or different or interesting with it. So if you're in that small group in between, the group of people who care about it, who understand there's something of value there but aren't literalists about it, that you're one of those people I'm talking to. You're one of those people I've wanted to teach for the last half century and had the great privilege of teaching many of you. Of course, the truth we have inherited in this spiritual tradition is not unique. There is one truth, I believe. There is one truth, and it's spoken of in all the great religious traditions. We have a particular language for it. Judaism is a language. It's our language for saying things. The way you say things, of course, affects many nuances. There's a difference between the way we talk about that truth and the way a Buddhist or a Hindu will talk about that truth, or a Christian, because each language shapes that truth itself, but the truth is one. What is that truth? Well, philosophically, I'm a monist. I believe there is only one. And I think that's the great secret that all religions are trying to teach. It's that which mystics have striven to understand all over the world, the problem of the one and the many. Mystic insight understands that there's only one, that everything is part of the one. And yet we seem to live in a world of multiplicity. That tension between the one and the many. If all is one, where did the many come from? How did the many come about? Is multiple existence just illusion? Or is it illusion without the word just? Is it another level of reality? How do we find the one within the many? How do we peel back the illusion or the outwardness of multiple identities in order to discover the one that underlies all and that lives in all? We talk about this twice every day when we say Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. We call out, Hear of Israel, God is one. God is one. I'm quoting now one of the Hasidic masters, the Sfas Emes, a favorite Hasidic teacher of mine. In a letter to his family, he wrote, it doesn't just mean there's one God. It means there's only one. There is nothing else. Everything in the world, he says, even physical things are part of that one. You just have to, and here's the trick, you just have to be able to negate your ego self so that you're able to see it. The Chabad tradition within Hasidism translates the same way. They say, know that the verse in the Torah says, know this day and set it on your heart, that Hashem is God in heaven above and on the earth beneath. En od. Their translation is, there ain't nothing else. Everything is the one. And that one, now we have to move into 21st century language. That one existed before the origin of this planet, existed on the other side of the Big Bang. And everything that came out of that Big Bang was part of that one. It was all in that oneness. And that one continues to spew forth energy that enlivens all being. And the energy of that one, the stardust out of which it blew, is present, forms the underlying substratum of everything that exists. It's there in all. On this planet, for some reason we do not begin to understand, it evolved into life. And then the long evolutionary journey, that journey from the first single-celled creatures under the sea to the incredible complexity of the human brain that we're only beginning to understand. We don't know why it happened, but we do know something. We do know a little bit. We've come to understand a little bit. Whatever that one is, it seems to have a great impulse toward variety, toward diversity. It exists in so many different forms. It's taken on the garment of so many different creatures, of so many different animal and vegetable forms, so many different types of existence. It seems to be present in each one, hidden within each one, the core of existence of everything that exists, that same one. In our language, I say this carefully, in our language, and our human language, I would say, it loves each of those creatures. It loves each of those creatures because it has chosen to enter that particular garb. It's chosen to put on that coat of many colors and be in that particular butterfly or human being or flower or snowflake for this moment of its existence. Does that one, that underlying one of existence, does it speak? Did it give us the Torah? No, of course not. Not in the naive sense. Not in the naive sense. Don't go back to childhood. But I think in some ways it does speak to us. I think the same way that internal one speaks in the voice of what we call instinct to every plant and says to it, spread out your roots, look for water, look for sunlight, reach upward, and says to every animal, eat, thrive, reproduce, bring forth that next generation before you die. Every animal knows that somehow from within itself. I think in the same way as it does that, as it speaks to every plant and every animal, it speaks to every human being. But to human beings, because of the development of our brain and because we have something within us that religions have always called the soul, it says to every human being, along with eat, drink, live, reproduce, it says, figure it out. Find out what you're doing here. Ask yourself questions. That's the word, that's the first word that God speaks to human beings in the Torah. God says to Adam, Ayeka, where are you? I think that inner voice that says to us, where are you, is something I can call revelation. It's the divine voice. Or it's the voice of oneness, or it's the voice of existence, if you like more antiseptic terms than that. I don't like the word G-O-D very much. I like Hebrew Yud He Vav He, is, was, will be. Haya, Hoveh, Yel, smushed together in that impossible noun verb of Yud He Vav He, of the name of God. But it speaks to us, I think. It says, where are you? Maybe it says the last words of the Shema. The Shema begins with listen. And the last words of the Shema, the 3 paragraphs that constitute the Shema, are Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am Yud He Vav He, your God. That's what we're listening for, I think. The Shema is listen to that oneness, and at the end you will hear it speak and say, I am. That's the I am of Sinai also, the first word of the Torah. Anochi, I am. And some people have said that's all it needs to say, the I am. Everything else comes out of that. An ancient tradition says that all the positive commandments come out in that first word, in that first commandment, I am, and all the negative commandments come out of the second commandment, Have no other gods before me. Make no idols. I am, that eternal voice that says I am. And I, of course, am the one who liberated you. Because of your knowing that I am, you were able to become free of slavery. And I think that's all kinds of enslavements. We are liberated from our slavery when we're in touch with that I am. That's what revelation means to me. We hear that if we listen to it, if we listen for it, and we say at Sinai, or through Moses, through the prophet if we want, the people had such an experience. The people had such an experience that were transformed by it. I don't care if Sinai happened as a particular event or if Sinai happened over hundreds of years. Sinai is engraved in our collective memory as such. Sinai is engraved in our memory that says, yes, our people had that great transformative experience of knowing the one. And in the face of that, they were transformed. We were transformed. And said, yes, we will be priests to this idea. We will teach this idea to humanity. Not idea, this experience. We will convey this experience to humanity. We had a great collective experience of standing in the presence of that oneness. And we want to share it with the rest of the human race. So in biblical language, that is God saying, you will be unto me a holy people and a nation of priests. But I think we said that. We understood this was a transformative moment. And we were somehow all present historically in that transformative moment. So what then is Sinai? I like to call it a vertical metaphor for an internal event. A vertical metaphor for an internal event. The real journey is a journey inward. If Moses heard that voice, he heard it speaking from within himself. That's where that voice speaks. That voice doesn't speak out of the sky. It speaks out of the heart. It speaks out of a deep inner place that is beyond the human self. This is not just self-knowledge. Our Western conception of the self is too limiting. It's not the ego self, but it's the inner place. It's the place in the journey within, particularly where we transcend the ego, where we get beyond the ego self and say, no, there is something deeper. There is something deeper speaking within me. You may call it the collective unconscious. You may call it the eternal mind that speaks within the self. The eternal one, the cosmic self of the universe that calls out to us and says, I am, and waits for us to respond, of course. That where are you question demands a response. How do we respond? How do we respond? Excuse me, here I share a favorite teaching that I heard from Heschel. Maybe the most profound single idea that I heard from Heschel, that I learned from Heschel. Years I had the great privilege of being a student. I learned sort of ask, why is the Torah so concerned with graven images? Why should the Torah, the revelation at Sinai, begin with, I am the Lord your God, and then you shall have no other gods before me and no graven images? The answer is, he says, not because God has no image. If it was just because God has no image, that's what Maimonides says. He's arguing with Maimonides here. Well, that's a theological error. All right, so you made an idol, but that's a theological error. Why should the Torah be so concerned with theological error? He says it's not because God has no image that you shouldn't make a graven image. God has an image. That image is you. You are a human being, and every human being is created in the image of God. But to take anything less than a full, living, breathing human being, like a piece of marble or a canvas, and try to make the image of God on that, that is what's called in Hebrew, lema'etet admut, the lessen the image of God. The only medium through which you can make God's image, the image of God, is the medium of your entire life. So the answer to the where are you of Eden doesn't come in the form of words, it comes in the form of a life commitment. It comes in the form of how we live, in the way of how we live our lives. So that's a vertical metaphor for an inward journey, vertical metaphor for an inward event. Religion speaks to a deeper level of mind, a different rung of consciousness than, excuse me, than discursive prose. Religion has nothing it can prove. The Jesuits gave up a long time ago trying to prove the existence of God. The Chabadniks took longer, but they've pretty much given it up too. The religious mind cannot prove, it can only testify. There's a very big difference. To prove something is a logical step. Any intelligent person would have to believe because I've gone this step and that step and the next step. To testify is to be a life witness. I put my life up to witness this truth that I know. That's a truth of faith, not a truth of reason. And it's a different and much deeper kind of truth. So that's what happened to us at Sinai. And you can put Sinai in as many quotation marks as you want. We were transformed. We covenanted to that moment. We, the Jewish people, created a covenant and said, we will remain faithful to this moment. Now, for biblical language for it, we have a verse in Exodus 19 where the story is first told. The verse says, Moshe yedaber ve'Elohim ya'anenu b'kol. Moses spoke and God responded b'kol, in a voice, they usually say. And the Talmud says on that, b'kolo shel Moshe. God spoke and Moses answered. Moses spoke and God answered in a voice. What was the voice? God answered in Moses' own voice. That seems to mean that Moses was the only speaker there. Sometimes Moses spoke as a person, and sometimes God took over Moses. He was in a state of possession. That's the way scholars have understood it for thousands of years. He was in a kind of possessed state, and God spoke through him. That's what God does. God speaks through the prophet. But does God speak through the prophet because God speaks in human language? Or does the prophet translate that language? In fact, in that verse, in that whole chapter, the word kol, the word kolot in Hebrew, doesn't really mean voices. It means thunderbolts. Moshe yedaber, Moses spoke and God responded in thunder. It takes a Moses to translate God's thunder into human language. Language is something that developed among human beings. I don't know a God who speaks in words. I do know a God who speaks in thunder. I do know a God who speaks in the human heart, who awakens the heart. I do know a God who allows us to open our hearts. But the translation of that into language, that's a human process. That's what the prophet does. So the rest of Torah, after Anochi and Lo Yelecha, after those first two commandments, the rest of Torah is our response. And indeed, that's what the rabbis teach. They say in the Talmud, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, quoting a verse from the end of Deuteronomy, the Torah was given to us, commanded to us by Moses. The word Torah, if you add up the numerical value of the letters, you know that game, it's called Gematria. You add up the numerical value of the letters, you get 611. Yes, but there are 613 commandments in the Torah. What about the other two? Those were the first two commandments. Anochi and Lo Yelecha. I am, and worship nothing else. I think I like to call worship nothing else the flip side of I am. Once you know the reality of I am, then you know there's nothing else you can worship, and worshiping anything else is a form of idolatry. Our idols don't come so much in alabaster and marble, but they do come in silver and gold, and the idol of success, and the idol of Hollywood, and the idol of celebrity, and all those idols we have worshipped, and I dare say, especially in this Corona season, we have seen the utter vanity and worthlessness of. I'm recording this on the day when the New York Times has in its first page the names of all those many, many victims of the illness. And we stare at that page and stare at our own lives and stare at the idolatries of our own lives and say something has to change. and that this is happening in the week when we prepare ourselves for Shavuot, maybe is not an accident in our lives. So, what's the relationship between the Torah text and this divine voice, which is really not a voice of thunder that Moses translates into language? One of the Hasidic masters I study, the Moreh Neim, says, God is hidden within the text. There's a hidden presence of divinity within the text of Torah. We find it because we're such experts at reading. We've been reading the Torah in non-literal ways for thousands of years. We coax the truth out of the Torah. There's a beautiful teaching in the Zohar, the great work of the medieval Kabbalists, talking about how the Torah is like a beautiful maiden who lives locked up in a castle. The Zohar was written in medieval Spain, and you could hear the flamenco guitars in the background. She has a lover who comes around to the castle every day, and he speaks of his love for her. And she peers out the window and looks at him and reveals herself to him alone. Nobody else sees her. Only he who loves her can see her. And bit by bit, she reveals her secrets more and more. So when we study Torah, it's not just that we reinterpret. It's not like we work the cold magic of our reinterpretation on the Torah. We seduce meaning out of her. And she seduces meaning out of us. Because as long as the Torah has been around a long time, and it understands, as long as we are reinterpreting it, it has a chance to reinterpret us. The relationship between us and the text and the secret presence of the one within it is a mutual relationship. As we transform the Torah in every generation of us is transformed by that encounter with the Torah as well. So we have been given the great opportunity to do that, to engage with it, and to say, yes, there is some kind of mysterious presence of the one in this ancient teaching, and I want to help rediscover it for my generation. One of my favorite teachings, I mentioned this last time a little while ago, one of my favorite teachings of his, a little bit adapted by me, but not much, is a comment on a Hebrew text you probably all know, the bracha you say after you have an aliyah in the synagogue. The bracha goes, Asher natan lanu Torat emet b'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Hashem noten Torah. We thank God for having given us the Torah of truth and for having implanted everlasting life in our midst. This Sfas Emes says, the Torah of truth God gave us, that's the written Torah. He believes more literally than I do that the Torah was directly given by God, but that's the ancient text that has this divine mystery hidden within it. But then Chayer Olam Nata B'tochenu, the eternal life implanted in our midst, he says that's the oral Torah. That's the process of reinterpretation. The old Torah has to meet the new Torah, which is the Torah that lives inside you and has the power to reinterpret and find your own path, find your own self, find your own reading, find your own way into the text. And when you do, something transformative happens. The blessing began by saying, Asher Natan Lanu, God who gave us the Torah in the past. But then it concludes, Noten HaTorah, God is giving the Torah now in the present. Because that process of your reinterpretation means that the Torah is still being given. It's still being given within you. It's still being given from your internal Sinai. And that's the place you have to find. When we study Torah, when we prepare to study Torah in the morning, we have a blessing we say before morning prayer, before we daven. The blessing goes, La'asok b'divrei Torah. La'asok, the word la'asok, to be busy with. Asuk is busy in modern Hebrew, but it really means to engage in words of Torah. I like to say that that's our commitment, to be engaged. That process of reinterpretation, however radically we reinterpret, however hard certain parts of the simple meaning of Torah may be for us, however far we see ourselves being from being literal believers. Once we engage, once we are oskim b'Torah, once we engage, we're part of the process. And then you can call yourself secular as much as you want. I go back to my Israeli friends in Tel Aviv who go to a Tikkun Leil Shavuot as secular Jews. You can call yourself secular as much as you want. You are osik b'Torah. You're engaged in this process of encounter with Torah. Once you engage with the Torah, she never lets you go. And that engagement is what we celebrate on this night of Shavuot, when we stay up all night. Just as Jacob stayed all night and wrestled with the angel, we stay up all night and wrestle with the teaching. God bless you all, and Chag Sameach. May you receive the Torah well and in good health. Amen.